Walburga Dolly Oesterreich, who went by Dolly, was born in 1880 in Germany and lived a not-so-high-profile life while growing up. Eventually, her family migrated to America, but even though they had moved to America for greater opportunity, they were still dealing with poverty, living on a poor farm in the Midwest. When she got older, she eventually met and married Fred William Oesterreich, who was a successful businessman and owner of the Milwaukee Apron Company. After getting married, Dolly finally lived the life of luxury that she always dreamed of, that unfortunately her parents could not provide her. She was the wife of a successful businessman, but unfortunately, there were a lot of differences between the two that caused rifts in their marriage proceeding forward. Dolly still had a thirst for life. She was still a young woman, and her marriage with Fred in the beginning was loving and exciting, but eventually it fizzled out. Fred was a very successful and focused businessman who worked very long hours due to all the stress of owning a successful business. Fred found his way to de-stress in a bottle. Fred's drinking problem became more severe and started interfering with his marriage. There were nights he came home too drunk to even acknowledge Dolly, which caused them to have many fights due to the fact that Dolly was no longer fulfilled in that marriage. But all of that changed when she met Otto Sanhuber. One day, Dolly was home and she discovered that her sewing machine had broken. She contacted Fred, expressing her frustrations, and he promised that he would send over a repairman to assist with fixing the sewing machine. That someone was Otto Sanhuber. Dolly was home when she heard a knock at the door. When she opened the door, she saw Otto Sanhuber standing there. She recognized him as being a 17-year-old boy that worked in the apron factory. He let her know that Fred had sent him to assist with the sewing machine, being that he was handy in many different ways. In that moment, Dolly was taken with him, and also Otto was taken with her, especially being that when she came to the door and he entered the home, she was wearing nothing but a robe and black stockings. And although Otto only came to the home by instruction of Fred to assist with one thing, it was the beginning of a whirlwind romance between the two. Dolly and Otto had begun having an affair. In the beginning, they tried to keep things as secretive and private as possible, so they were meeting at hotels, but eventually Otto started coming to the home. Even though there was an age difference, Otto fell in love with Dolly and wanted to cater to her every need. But the problem was, some of the neighbors started noticing Otto coming and going from the home, and Dolly and Otto realized that they needed to make other arrangements if they wanted to continue on with their affair. One day after one of their love sessions, they were laying in bed when Dolly suggested that Otto move into the home with her and Fred, but not just in a normal way. She suggested that he move into their attic. Being that Fred was away from home most of the time, and when he was home, he was intoxicated, Dolly felt that it would be safe if Otto stayed in the home, and that more likely they wouldn't be caught. Being that Otto was so in love with Dolly, he agreed and immediately moved in. For a while, Otto had no problem with living in the attic. He lived a strange life, being that he was stuck in one room for the majority of the time, but he was able to make some sort of a life and existence for himself. Whenever Fred was home, he remained upstairs. See, the way that Otto saw it was that he was living rent-free in a home with his lover and also got free food. Now, even though Otto tried his best to be as quiet and as secretive as possible, it didn't always go unnoticed. There were many times where Otto would come downstairs while Dolly and Fred were sleeping to get food from the kitchen. There were many times where Fred heard things moving around and thought it was strange, but never fully investigated it. They were able to keep their affair going for quite some time, living in what some would say was a bit of a fantasy world. But Otto was happy as long as he was with Dolly, and Dolly was happy as long as Otto kept providing her with what she needed that Fred wouldn't. Eventually, Fred's business started to grow even more, and stated to Dolly that they were moving from Milwaukee to Los Angeles. Dolly stated that she was okay with this, but on one condition. that the house that they moved to must have an attic. Fred thought nothing of it, and he fulfilled that promise, and the new home that they got in Los Angeles had an attic. Now, one would think that this would be the thing that would end the affair between Otto and Dolly, so she suggested that he moved with them. He agreed, and Dolly sent him ahead of time to move into the attic safely and quietly without anyone noticing. But unfortunately, the move to Los Angeles didn't make things better between Dolly and Fred. Their relationship became more volatile, and they started arguing a lot more once they moved into their new home. It became frustrating for Otto because this was the woman that he loved, and he hated hearing her in such agony when it came down to the life that she had to live with Fred. But one day, he couldn't take it anymore. It was August 22nd, 1922. Fred had come home and immediately got into an argument with Dolly. Otto heard the entire argument from upstairs as their voices got louder and louder. Otto started fearing that there was a possibility that Dolly was being harmed, and he couldn't take it anymore. Otto decided to take matters into his own hands. He grabbed his .22 caliber gun and proceeded downstairs. When he reached the main level, he creeped into the room where Fred and Dolly were arguing. Fred's back was facing the doorway while he was yelling, but Dolly could see Otto creeping into the room. She looked over at him, and that caused for Fred to turn around to see Otto, his once 17-year-old employee, standing in front of him, pointing a gun straight in his face. Fred was confused at first view, but then eventually realized what was going on. Otto demanded that he leave Dolly alone. Fred became furious, fueling with anger, and started to step towards Otto. And in that moment, Otto shot Fred, taking his life instantly. It took Otto a moment to take in what just happened, but Dolly was different. Dolly was abnormally calm, even though her lifeless husband was laying in the middle of the floor. Dolly eventually gathered herself and told Otto that they needed to come up with a plan to tell the authorities. So they came up with the plan of making it look as if it was a home invasion robbery. To further make the incident look as if it was real, Otto locked Dolly in the closet upstairs, making it seem as if when the robbers came in, they shoved her in the closet. He took her upstairs and locked her in the closet and tossed the key before returning to the attic. He took the gun with him and went back up to the attic to wait for the police to arrive, trusting that one of the neighbors would end up calling the police, in which they did. The police finally arrived to the home, and when entering, they saw Fred in the middle of the floor. They continued to look around to see if there was anybody else in the home, and eventually started hearing something from the upstairs area. When going up the stairs to investigate, they realized it was a woman's voice. It was Dolly calling out for Fred. They finally made it to the closet and were able to get in. When they opened the door, Dolly fell out onto the floor, appearing as if she had been sobbing for a long time. After the police found Dolly, they sat her in the living room while the rest of the police officers investigated the rest of the home. She told them the story that her and Otto thought up, which was there was a burglary. She stated that her and Fred were having a quiet night at home when an intruder entered the home. She was very vague about the information that she was giving, and she didn't seem to have that much. The authorities found it very strange that during this burglary, nothing was really taken. But she said that they stole a lot of the belongings, shot Fred, and then shoved her in the closet. During the process of the police getting the story from Dolly, they became very suspicious whenever they asked her if her and her husband had ever fought or if they may have been going through something, and she immediately stated no. She said they never fought, which the investigators found very strange. But even though they were suspicious of Dolly, they had no evidence to connect her to the crime. Her and Otto's plan worked. After being released from custody, Dolly wasted no time moving on. She moved into a new home and tried to start a new life for herself. And one would think that now that Fred was gone, this would be the perfect opportunity for Dolly and Otto to finally live their life in love out in the public. But that's not what Dolly had in mind. She felt that things were great exactly as they were. So even in the new home that she lived in, Otto moved with her, but he moved into the attic, not into the home. After they both moved and tried to put the incident behind them, even though it was not ideal, Otto agreed and moved back into the attic, once again going along with what Dolly requested. During that time period, he was able to publish a few pulp stories and got himself a new typewriter with the money that he earned, all while Dolly was living her life to the fullest. Eventually, she started seeing a lawyer named Herman S. Shapiro. She carried on a relationship with him, but she was dissatisfied in that relationship in the same way that she was dissatisfied in her marriage with Fred. Shapiro worked a lot of long hours and took his profession very seriously, which was not satisfying to Dolly. So she started seeing a man named Roy Klum to keep herself satisfied. But many believe that she didn't actually want to be with him, but used him for her own benefit. She requested that Klum get rid of the gun that she had in her home, that she stated was Fred's, and said that the reason why she wanted him to get rid of it was because it resembled the same gun that the burglars used to take the life of her husband. She was able to persuade him enough to where he agreed, but even though he did this favor for Dolly, their relationship eventually ended. But after the breakup, Klum felt strange about his attempt of getting rid of the gun, so he decided to go to the police and let them know what he had done, what was requested, and the story that was given to him. He explained to the police that he had thrown the gun into a tar pit. The investigators went to the area where he was supposed to have gotten rid of the gun, but he actually didn't get rid of the gun. They ended up finding the gun in the area, but the gun was still together. There was also a second gun that Dolly had, and she persuaded her neighbor to bury the gun, giving them the same excuse that she gave Klum. But when he heard about everything that was going on, the neighbor dug up the gun and took it to the police station. Afterwards, Dolly was brought into custody, and the investigators thought that they had finally found something to take her down. But unfortunately, they weren't able to tie either one of the guns to Dolly, being that the guns had been corroded. But they still didn't actually release Dolly. She remained in jail while on trial. During the time that she was still in jail, she requested that her lover Shapiro buy groceries and take it to her home. He found it very strange, being that she was in jail and they weren't very sure of when she would actually be home. But she stated to Shapiro that her half-brother was living in her home and she wanted the groceries to be in the home for him. She told him that when he arrived to the home, to tap on the ceiling, and that her half-brother Otto would come down. So he did. He went to the home and tapped on the ceiling, and Otto came out of the attic. Shapiro was taken aback because he had no knowledge of any of her family members living in the house before. When Otto came down from the attic, he sat and had a conversation with Shapiro and revealed that he wasn't a half-brother to Dolly, but that he was a lover of hers and had been for the last several years, which included the time period that Dolly and Shapiro had been together. But instead of leaving Dolly once he heard this story, he told Otto to get lost, and he remained in a relationship with Dolly. Shapiro was able to get Dolly released and eventually moved in the house with her. But even in her new relationship, things didn't work out. After 7 years, the relationship turned sour. They broke up, and Shapiro moved out of the house. But when he did so, he decided to go back to the authorities and tell him everything that he had discovered. There was a warrant put out for not just Dolly's arrest, but Otto's as well. After the trial, Otto was found guilty of manslaughter. The investigators finally had all of the answers that they needed to take Dolly down, and now Otto. Unfortunately, the statute of limitations on manslaughter had run out, so Otto was set free, and so was Dolly. But even after all that Dolly and Otto had been through, it was the trials that finally made them realize they needed to go their separate ways. So they did. Otto left Los Angeles and remarried after he changed his name. Afterwards, Dolly started dating a man named Ray Hendrick, and she remained in a relationship with him for the next 30 years. Eventually, they finally married on April 5th, 1961. But unfortunately, Dolly died 3 days later at the age of 81. Dolly and Otto never saw one another again. Thank you so much for joining me for this Mystery Addict video. And as always, stay weird. Normal's overrated.